Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into a really fundamental legal issue in America right now, birthright citizenship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our plan is to sort of cut through all the noise, get to the core arguments, and really leave you with a solid understanding of what's actually at stake here. We've gone through a pile of legal analyses, historical docs, recent reports, all that good stuff.
And it's important because this isn't just some, dusty legal idea. It's about how a few words in the Constitution define who is an American. It impacts millions, shapes our identity.
Definitely.
So we'll trace the history, unpack the constitutional points, and get into this intense legal fight happening right now at the Supreme Court.
Okay, let's dive right in. The immediate spark for this deep dive was that executive order from President Trump, January 20th, 2025, day one of his second term.
Right.
And this order, it really aimed to change how birthright citizenship works, specifically for kids born here if their parents aren't legal residents or maybe they're here on temporary visas.
Yeah, a fundamental shift.
Huh?
Because for generations, the understanding was you're born on U.S. soil, you're a citizen, period. This order challenged that head on.
And the reaction from the courts was fast.
Incredibly fast. Within days, you had two federal judges stepping in to block it temporarily. Senior District Judge John Coffiner in Seattle, he's a Reagan appointee.
Right.
He called the order blatantly unconstitutional, said birthright citizenship is a fundamental constitutional right, and the government can't just play policy games with the Constitution. Pretty strong language.
Very strong. And wasn't there another judge?
Yes. District Judge Deborah Boardman in Maryland, a Biden appointee. She basically said, look, no court in the country has ever endorsed the president's interpretation. This court will not be the first.
Wow. So not exactly subtle disagreement there.
Not at all. These are forceful judicial statements.
And it wasn't just judges, right? We saw states jumping in too.
Oh, yeah. A swift kind of multi-front pushback. States like Washington, Arizona, Illinois, Oregon, plus immigrant rights groups, all filing suits.
And their main point.
Consistent argument. The order violates the 14th Amendment. Plain and simple.
It makes you think, how can something seemingly so settled, still be this contested after more than 150 years?
Well, to really get it, you have to go back to 1868, right after the Civil War.
The 14th Amendment.
Exactly. That's when it was adopted. And its main goal, its explicit purpose, was to overturn that infamous Supreme Court decision, Dred Scott v. Sandford, from 1857.
The one that said black people couldn't be citizens.
Correct. Whether they were enslaved or free, just a devastating ruling. The 14th Amendment was the direct constitutional answer to that injustice. It was meant to clearly define citizenship.
And the key words, the ones at the center of everything now.
It's that first sentence. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside.
Subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Sounds technical, but it's the whole ballgame, isn't it?
It really is. That phrase is the linchpin. And how the Supreme Court interpreted it, well, that's crucial.
And how did they interpret it?
Well, the landmark case, the one that set the standard for over a century, is United States v. Wong Kim Ark from 1898.
Wong Kim Ark, born in San Francisco, right, to Chinese parents.
Exactly. His parents were permanent residents but couldn't become citizens themselves because of laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act. Huge discrimination back then.
So what happened to him?
He took a trip to China, and when he came back, U.S. officials wouldn't let him in. They said, you're not a citizen.
Wow. So he sued?
He did, all the way to the Supreme Court.
And the court?
They sided with Wong. 6-2 decision. Justice Horace Gray wrote the majority opinion. He said, look, the main point of the 14th Amendment was citizenship for black people, yes, but the language applies broadly.
So birth on U.S. soil equals citizenship?
Pretty much. He said it affirms the ancient and fundamental rule of citizenship by birth within the territory, including all children here born of resident aliens. He noted only very narrow exceptions, like kids of invading armies or foreign diplomats.
Because diplomats aren't really subject to our laws in the same way.
Precisely. So Wong Kim Ark really cemented the principle. Born here, you're a citizen, regardless of parent status. And that's been the bedrock understanding for, 125 years?
But there was a dissent, right? Two justices disagreed.
There was. Chief Justice Fuller and Justice Harlan dissented, and their argument sounds very familiar today. Fuller argued Wong wasn't completely subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S.
Why not?
Because his parents, being Chinese nationals barred from citizenship, owed allegiance to the Emperor of China. Fuller basically said the amendment wasn't meant for people like Wong, whose parents owed loyalty elsewhere.
That sounds almost exactly like the argument being made now against children of undocumented immigrants.
It's the core of it. This distinction between being subject to laws versus having complete allegiance. The majority rejected it in 1898, but it's being revived now.
And wasn't there another case later, Plyler v. Doe, that seems relevant too?
Yes, good point. 1982. The court struck down a Texas law that tried to keep undocumented kids out of public schools.
On what grounds?
Equal protection clause of the 14th Amendment. Justice Brennan wrote that being within its jurisdiction applies to anyone, citizen or stranger, as long as they are subject to state laws.
So if you have to obey the laws, traffic laws, paying taxes, facing criminal charges, you're under the jurisdiction.
Exactly. Brennan said they're subject to the full range of obligations imposed by state law. So even being undocumented doesn't remove you from the state's jurisdiction in that sense. It reinforced that broad understanding.
Okay, so connecting that history to today, the current administration's lawyers, they're leaning heavily on that Wong Kim Ark dissent.
They absolutely are.
Yeah.
Their argument relies on it repeatedly. They claim that children born to undocumented parents or temporary visitors aren't truly subject to the jurisdiction because the parents owe allegiance, or a measure of allegiance, to their home country.
So they're trying to drive a wedge into that subject to the jurisdiction phrase, arguing it means more than just being physically present and subject to laws.
Precisely. They're pushing that full allegiance idea that the court rejected over a century ago. It's a direct assault on the established precedent.
So, okay, that's the deep constitutional question. But when the Supreme Court heard arguments back in May 15th, they weren't just focused on whether the executive order itself is constitutional.
That's right. There's this whole other really significant procedural battle happening. The main question before the justices right now is about the power of these lower court federal judges to issue what are called nationwide or universal injunctions.
Explain those. What's a nationwide injunction?
It's basically a court order from a single district judge that blocks a government policy from taking effect anywhere in the entire country. Not just for the people who sued, but for everyone.
So one judge can halt a policy nationwide?
Potentially, yes. And it's telling that the Trump administration, at the Supreme Court level, they're not even putting up a full-throated defense of the executive order's constitutionality.
Why not? Because they expect to lose on that point anyway.
Likely, yeah. The lower court slapped it down pretty hard based on Wong Kim Ark. So strategically, they're focusing their fire on the scope of the injunctions. They're saying, okay, maybe you can block it for the plaintiffs, but one judge shouldn't stop this policy everywhere.
Why is that specific issue, the nationwide injunction, such a hot topic now?
Well, they've become a real source of frustration, frankly, for both parties. Professor Samuel Bray at Notre Dame calls them a bipartisan scourge.
Bipartisan scourge, meaning both Democrats and Republicans hate them when they're in power.
Exactly. Administrations get really frustrated when a single judge in one district halts a major policy initiative nationwide. Critics say it's judicial overreach, it messes with the executive branch's job, and it encourages judge shopping.
Judge shopping, where you file your case specifically hoping to get a sympathetic judge.
Right. You file in a district where you think a judge is likely to rule your way and issue that powerful nationwide block. Professor Bray actually thinks the executive order on birthright citizenship is flagrantly wrong. But he sees this case as a chance for the court to rein in these broad injunctions anyway.
But surely there's a counter-argument. Why have nationwide injunction?
Oh, absolutely. Professor Stephen Vladek at Georgetown argues fiercely against limiting them. He says doing that sort of gives up the game.
Gives up the game how?
He means it would let the government potentially enforce laws widely seen as illegal in large parts of the country, just not where a specific lawsuit managed to block it. It creates chaos.
A patchwork system.
Exactly. Vladek argues these injunctions are vital for a uniform national standard, especially when fundamental rights are involved. Imagine the logistical nightmare, he says, if your citizenship status depends on which state you were born in, or even which hospital.
Yeah, that sounds unworkable.
Right. Proponents say, look, if the federal government is breaking the law on a national scale, you need a national remedy, especially for constitutional rights affecting potentially millions who can't all file individual lawsuits.
So what happens if a kid born in Philly isn't a citizen under the order, but one born just over the river in Camden, New Jersey is because their parents were part of a suit there?
That's the chaos they're talking about. It becomes arbitrary, discriminatory. How do you even manage that? It flies in the face of equal protection.
Okay, so this brings us right up to the present moment. We're recording this on June 26th, 2025. And there's news from the court today.
Big news. Chief Justice Roberts announced from the bench this morning that tomorrow, June 27th, is it? The final day for opinions this term.
And this Birthright citizenship nationwide injunction case is one of the ones still left.
It's one of the final 6 big ones everyone's waiting for. Crunch time.
Any tea leaves from the arguments or recent decisions?
Well, during the oral arguments back in May, the justices did seem, let's say, hesitant to completely overturn the block on the citizenship restrictions. They acknowledged the Wong-Kim-Ark precedent is strong. But they also seemed very interested in finding a way to scale back the power of those nationwide injunctions. It's a tricky needle to thread.
And did today's rulings give any clues?
Maybe. They handed down a significant ruling today in Medina v. Planned Parenthood South Atlantic. The court ruled 6-3 that private individuals couldn't sue to challenge state restrictions on Medicaid funds going to Planned Parenthood.
Why couldn't they sue?
The court said they didn't have standing, basically. Not the right kind of direct legal injury to bring the case. The majority said the issue of enforcing that part of the Medicaid law is up to the government agency or maybe Congress, not for the courts.
So another example of the court maybe wanting to limit who gets into court and what judges decide.
It certainly fits that pattern, yeah. Limiting judicial reach, maybe pushing power back to the other branches. It shows a potential direction on how they view the role of courts versus, say, executive actions or congressional laws.
Okay, so pulling this all together, this deep dive really shows it's not just about one executive order.
Not at all. It's centuries of constitutional history. It's the meaning of just a few words like jurisdiction, and it has massive real-world consequences for families living here right now.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that these legal principles we talk about, they aren't just abstract ideas in books.
They're living concepts. They shape our society. They define who belongs, who's included in that whole idea of the American promise.
So for you, our listener, as we wait for that final Supreme Court decision tomorrow, here's something to chew on.
A final thought.
If the court does limit nationwide injunctions in this case, if they allow for this kind of fragmented application of citizenship rules, where being born here might mean something different in Texas versus California, what happens then?
Yeah, what are the ripple effects?
What does that do to the idea of consistent federal law across all the states? And what becomes the real practical meaning of citizenship day to day, not just in the law books, but in people's actual lives?
A lot to think about.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this gave you a clearer picture of a very complex, very important issue unfolding right now.
Hope it was helpful.
Until next time, keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, keep that curiosity alive.